We'll start where we ended the first lecture on ethics in research, ethics in science. So we'll talk about science and engineering community in research, ethical awareness and commitment. Where earlier I have said that there are thousands of graduate students entering into the conceptual framework in research ethics. And this, all the postgraduates entering for research will be mentored under a particular program. And finally, the end product comes out with ethically motivated and committed researchers in science and engineering. So the second part of the lecture, I will elaborate on the ethical principles. So this is where we started, and now we will be describing the ethical principle and try to define these principles. So when we work, we need to have certain samples, right? And these samples can be the dead samples from the live organisms. For example, human being. Now, if you are doing some research where certain parts of the research will take into account certain parameters drawn from human subjects. For example, let's say you are working on cancer, so you need to work on the cancer samples, let's say. So someone who is working on the liver cancer must get the samples from the human subjects. Now the person from whom you are getting the subject, interestingly, ethically, that person should know for what reason that particular piece of tissue will be used for research, and for which you require to explain the participant of this research and get a consent of it. So there are a lot of many things which we need to comply with, and these are all called ethical principles. So let's understand what are the important ethical principles in science. For example, the first one is the duty to society. The researchers and research must contribute to the well-being of the society. So this is the first and foremost ethical principle, that whatever research you do and the researchers involved in that particular research must contribute to the well-being of the society. Next, very important point is the beneficiaries. That means the persons who are participating in your research as giving away samples. So all these are called research participants. And whatever the research you are conducting, that should have the welfare of the research participant in mind as a goal. So your goal is set that researchers should have the welfare of the research participant, and they should strive for the benefits of the research to outweigh the risks. Next important ethical principle is the conflict of interest. So when, let's say, multiple researchers are working and each one of them might bear certain commitment to its institution, and there shall not be any conflict of interest when the entire results is now ready for getting published. So conflict of interest is very important ethical principle that you need to resolve. So researchers should minimize the financial and other influences on their research and on research participants that could bias the research results. So conflict of interest is more often frequently directed at the researcher level, but it may also involve the research participants, that means who are participating in this research, if they are provided with a financial or non-financial incentive to participate. Now, when you are involving human subject, then you need to have the consent from those volunteers. So all research participants must voluntarily agree to participate in the research. You cannot coax them by giving some false implication and you to cheat the participant. That is not the proper ethics. So all participants, research participants who are contributing to giving you the samples, they must voluntarily agree to participate in research without pressure from financial gain or other coercion. That means you cannot just buy them, that I'm giving you 100 rupees and you give me the stool sample. So it cannot be like that. And their agreement must include, right, an understanding of the research and its risk. So when participants are unable to consent or when vulnerable groups are involved in research, you should take specific action must be taken by the researchers and their institution to protect these participants. Then the question of integrity is very important, which is very much related to honesty and truthfulness. The researchers should demonstrate honesty and truthfulness. They should not fabricate data. They should not falsify the results or purposefully omit the relevant data. So they should report the findings fully, minimizing or eliminating the bias in their methods and disclose everything which is underlying the assumptions. So that is a very important ethical principle in science research. Then the question of non-discrimination. What is that? That researchers should minimize their attempts to reduce the benefits of research on specific group. That means whatever the outcome of the research should go entirely to the society, not benefiting a specific group. Or you cannot deny benefits from the other groups. So that's very important. The next important ethical principle is non-exploitation. Researchers should not exploit or take unfair advantage of the research participants. That means those who are contributing to your research in the form of giving you the sample, giving you the parameters, you cannot take unfair advantage. That means it's a question of exploitation. So ethically, you should not exploit. So the principle is non-exploitation. Then the question of privacy and confidentiality. The research participant may not agree to disclose their identity. In that case, the privacy of the research participant is needed to be protected. So research participants have the right to control access to their personal information and to their bodies in the collection of biological specimens. Participants may control how others see, touch, or obtain the information. And then next, the question of confidentiality arises. Researchers will protect the private information provided by the participants from release of the data. So confidentiality is an extension of the concept of privacy. It refers to the participants' understanding of, an agreement to, and the ways identifiable information will be stored and shared. Next important ethical principle is the professional competence. Researchers should engage only in the work that they are qualified to perform, while also participating in training and betterment programs with the intent of improving their skill set. This concept includes how researchers choose research methods, statistical methods, the sample sizes that are appropriate and would not cause misleading results. So this is the question of professional competence, which is another invaluable ethical principle. And the last one is the professional discipline. What is that? The researchers should engage in ethical research and help other researchers engage in ethical research by promulgating ethical behaviors through practice, publishing and communicating, mentoring and teaching, and all other activities. They are clubbed together under professional discipline. Now, you have gone through all these principles. Now we can categorize this entire principles under three broad categories. What are those? The first one is the ethical scientific inquiry. And the research inquiry itself must benefit the society. So the principle is duty to society. The next category is ethical conducts and behaviors of researchers. And what the researchers should conduct themselves in certain manners, and they are responsible for their knowledge and awareness of ethics and appropriate research methods. And the principles are conflict of interest, as I explained, integrity, non-discrimination, professional competence, professional discipline. These 5 things come under ethical conduct and behaviors of researchers. Now, how you are going to treat the research participants? That means those who are involved in this research by contributing certain samples to you. It could be biological sample. It could give you some parameters of their own body. So ethical treatment of research participants, where we describe this category, that research participants should be treated according to certain guidelines and treated humanly, not like animals. And the environmental or secondary effects of research should be considered. So let's say if you are feeding someone with some BT plants, the person who is fed with the BT plants know that I am taking a plant that is producing BT toxin. And then you get the informed consent from that particular participant. So ethical principle under this big category of ethical treatment and research participants, they are also 5 in numbers. What are those? Informed consent. So you must have to inform the research participant and get his consent. Beneficence, that means the product of the research should benefit the participant. You cannot discriminate, so non-discrimination. Non-exploitation, that means you cannot buy the participants by money or some other influence. So that is a type of exploitation, and you need to stop that exploitation. And you must have to keep the privacy and confidentiality that the research participants demand. So this is what a figure that gives you the part that is played by the researchers. That means the researchers should have integrity, competence, responsibility, honesty, and the participants who are taking part in this research should get the justice, should have the dignity. You have to protect the privacy and confidentiality, and all will lead to this one: non-maleficence, beneficence, and autonomy. So all these principles now can be shown in a beautifully in this type of figures, where the researchers and the research participants are clubbed together to constitute the entirety of ethical principles of research. Now, what is ethics in research, and why is it important? That is the question. Will go into the more details about certain research ethics in and you see this picture, all are from the biological side. These are chromosomes, right? These are the bands of any chromosome, and these are the genetic material. So this is the blueprint of everything, of all life organism, is the DNA and the information. So when you are dealing with such things like genetic engineering or molecular biology, the research, you need to understand what's the ethics behind these type of research. So there is ethical dilemma in biologists. What is dilemma? That means cannot make out that what should we do. So natural scientists in general, if you think about the biologists more so, they face another dilemma, and that's an ethical dilemma. This pertains to the resolution of conflict of interest among scientists themselves. For biologists, three particular cases are important, and we should merit the consideration here. And these are the three issues I'm going to talk of. The first issue deals with the conflict of interest between societies for animal rights and ethics versus the demands of biological research and animal science education. For example, when you are testing certain drugs, you are using the animals. So animals are subjected to a degree of cruelty. So there are societies which are there to protect the animal rights. And therefore there is again a clash between, then how can you conduct the biomedical research? So there must be certain compromises between these two extremes. So the first issue is the conflict of interest between societies for animal rights and ethics versus the demands of biomedical research and animal science education. For example, in zoology classes, you have to dissect. So when you are taking the live samples, that means actually you are depleting biological samples from the nature. So there could be a conflict here. So this is the first dilemma or the first issue. The second issue deals with the conflict of interest between the philosophical underpinnings of biodiversity conservation and that of bioprospecting. For example, how the biodiversity derived products you are going to manipulate or exploit the natural resources for human welfare. So that is again another dilemma which plays within the biologists. And the third issue is the man and the environmental conflict. So you go for the industry and technological development, but that indirectly or directly it affects the environment. So there is a conflict between the environmentalist and industrial or technological development. So there must be a fine balance. That's leave and let leave is the only answer to all these perplexing problems of existence. And there is a very thin line between what we need, our greed, means our propensity to ask for more and more, and propriety. Propriety means who's going to own it. So the owning principle, the greed and the need. So there must be a, a delineation in these three items. Okay, and that exists, and that's why the conflict is also there. So there are issues, ethical issues in Indian science. Now, if I give you a representative note on this, let's say before we got independence in 1947, in 1938, the physicist Meghnad Shah, he requested Subhash Chandra Bose, the then president of the Congress, to set up a national planning committee in science and culture with Jawaharlal Nehru as its chairperson. So that is the first attempt from an Indian scientist asking a politician to set up a national planning committee in science and culture. So after that, we got our independence, and over the last 5 decades, science has grown enormously in India. Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he saw a link between practice of quality science by its people and solution of many of the India's then existing social, economic and development problems. So you have to innovate something, and innovation and the use of innovation at the grassroots level will be an essential ingredient to in all strategies and solutions to this vexing problems. The success of such a scientific enterprise of national dimension will cardinally depend on the ethical practices at all levels. So an important element that has not yet been fully realized is that empowering and skill development should not be restricted to instruction on skill sets, but it should integrate with them major instruction on character building. So a good human being is the first requisite for good science. Ethical practices of research and education in science and in the generation, absorption and improvisation of technology thus need to be deeply imbibed in the minds of the students. That means you people should imbibe this ethical sense, the principles, and become a very good human being, because that is the first requisite for good science. So now the science today that we see is an enterprise. Why? Because it is an organized activity which is conducted in institutions and by teams. So number of people work together in a team to bring out certain results in research. So now it is an enterprising activity. So when it is an enterprise, then it is linked to rewards and recognition. So the groups, they compete with each other. So therefore, there is a competitive nature. And when this competition comes, unethical behavior for possible short-term gains are also the byproduct of this competition. In our country, government is the major source of funding, my dear. So when funds become limited, then there is a sharp competition. So there is a competitional increment. Okay, so the competition increases, and that is going to put unhealthy pressure on scientists. So in a country which is little over 100 years old in the practice of modern science and technology, I'm definitely talking about India, emphasis should be placed on originality and quality and not on quantity. But it is one of the saddest part that the peer pressures They tempt the scientists to take shortcuts. The highest ethics is in the ethics of excellence. Creativity does not survive in an atmosphere of selfishness. So when there is an atmosphere of selfishness, that you are not sharing your things with others, knowledge or materials, then the creativity cannot survive. So creativity flies away. Creativity does not survive in an atmosphere of selfishness. So quality assurance therefore shall come through the understanding of ethical dimensions. There is much room for improvement of competitive funding or examinations. Excellence and equity are mutually exclusive. Policymakers have to be clear in their minds about what they are looking for. Are they looking for excellence or are they looking for the equity? I told you these two terms, they're mutually exclusive. Similarly, all the activities connected with science like funding, doing research, education and training must have an ethical foundation. Further, administering institutions should have ethical understanding of the task. So accountability of every player is the biggest ethical problem that is confronting us. The highest ethics, I repeat, is the ethics of excellence. So there is an organization of funding for science. The distribution of state funds to deserving individuals and institutions needs to be carried out based on well thought out guidelines. So if you fail to provide these guidelines, the distributions will never be a fair distribution. It will be an unfair distribution of state funds. So these guidelines must be created through a thorough discussion among the stakeholders. In the case of, let's say, in case of physics and chemistry, which are highly conceptualized natural sciences, scientific merit and originality of the proposals mostly guide both the scientists and the funding advisory committees in decision-making process. So if the quality is very high and if you find merit in your science, you will be funded. So quality to some extent is assured because in physics and chemistry, we search for scientific merit and originality of the proposal. But in case of biology, an old but persisting perception among biologists is that it is an information-driven science. However, in recent years, some biologists have been projecting biology also as a highly conceptualized science. So these two perceptions have to some extent resulted in funding policies being decided through sectarian battles. The South, the North, the East, the Northeast. So it goes on battling for certain funds. Geographical, it could be geographical as well as institutional. Should it go to the IITs or should the fund go to the universities? So there are sectarian battles and not based on white papers on state of development of each domain of knowledge and national needs. In fact, sound and foolproof criteria to judge the status of an area of research in terms of quality have not yet developed and are difficult to develop. And whatever the scientometric analysis that we get, that how many impact factor, journal publication, etc., which is added to a scientist caliber, is only a surrogate marker of quality and has its philosophical issues. Honest and competent peer review has not been nurtured adequately in our country, and reviews and decisions are often more subjective than objective. So these are the shortcomings of our country. So the quality workers who are globally recognized, they do not have links with the average world of science. What is average world of science? Please read universities. So the quality workers or the globally recognized scientists of India, they have very least linkages with the universities. So therefore what happens? The latter, that means the university, suffers in quality. So some issues such as what I'm going to point out next, probably many more are there that need to be addressed immediately. What is that? Multiple funding for the same project or individual. An individual can have more than one project. Decisions on thrust areas vis-a-vis the nation's needs. So when there is a decision, you should identify the thrust areas where there is a national requirement or the national needs. There must be a relative weightage for fundamental, applied and translational research areas, including technology development and marketing vis-a-vis nation's needs. Third important point or issue is to identify future demands and manpower needs in fundamental and applied sciences. And you must have to reduce the regional inhomogeneity in skills and trainings. So if you look at the entire part of India, so there are certain parts, it is not homogeneous. The knowledge domain is not homogeneous in all parts. So you must reduce this regional inhomogeneity in skills and trainings. And interestingly, our country has many funding agencies that differ in various degrees in criteria, like transparency in operation, outcome of the funded projects, identifying the new areas, nurturing technology development, and most important, infrastructure development. Quality publication have not come out of all funded projects. This is very interesting. Government of India funds a lot of projects, but at the end of the day, the governments want to seek the quality publications that are not coming out. So notwithstanding this, it is also true that Indian science, I repeat, the Indian science in terms of quality has not become an autonomous and sustainable activity. So our science quality has not reached to that extent that it is going to earn its autonomy and sustainability. Why? Breakthroughs which are coming very often in the Western science, we get it very little in India. Even if you talk about Asia, except Japan and China in general, and India in particular, have not contributed to discoveries and inventions significantly. So this is a serious limitation of Indian science. Hence, the first question to ask while deciding on funding policy is whether a vast size of third-rate scientific manpower should be sustained, or only technological achievement and sustainable first-rate science should be supported. So this is a billion-dollar question, and you need to decide, and the funding policy should decide whether we'll go for a vast size of third-rate scientific manpower or a sustainable, achievable, first-rate science should be supported for. So there is dilemmas of research ethics. See, there is a Professor B.M. Hegre of NITTE University. He defines health as desire to do work well is then indicated by desire to think. So when we possess such wealth and health, that will lead to happiness. Curiosity to know and understand, that drives pure research. A happy mind does research by instinct. So you require to be happy if you want to do good science, good research. So man is the only animal who can think and is aware of his thoughts. And science is a specialized thinking activity, restricted to understanding the structure and function of nature. It is constrained by research methods and research questions or problems only about natural phenomena. Research, another part of the dilemma of the research ethics. The research can be done by individuals with freedom to think and decide. It is then an ideal activity. Pure science is therefore value-free or amoral. That means neither moral nor immoral. Presently, most research that is being carried out under institutional framework and as a group activity, we find careerism in it. So institutional goals and careerism, they are going to dictate the type of research work undertaken. And therefore it takes away the freedom to think deeper and on the exotic, and is called the professional research. So this is another dilemma that Indian science faces. Most scientists do not have the luxury of making a choice between ideal research and professional research. And no new results can arise, okay, if one is not doing ideal, curiosity and aptitude driven science. So unless your science or your research is driven by curiosity and aptitude, no good results can come out. So this is the first research dilemma one faces. What is that? Ideal research or curiosity driven research activity that should follow the identification of research problems or questions, and that has a promise to unravel something new. So true research problems, they arise in minds from ab initio. Ekbar scratch thinking, ab initio, from starting. In contrast, the research problems for professional research, however, come from external sources, that is, published literature or assigned tasks, etc. Professional research is done by experts, begins by identifying a time-bound research goal, that is, professional research. It could be a technical program of work which is executed in a reproducible manner. Each area of research in domain knowledge, for example, biochemistry, cell biology, ecology, etc. This has a pattern of technical problems, and characteristic techniques are to be identified in discerning a problem in that area. So professional researchers, right, they identify the research patterns and execute them with technical rigor. Quality or standards is usually dictated and expected of that area by scientists from Western countries. So it is dictated, the quality or standard is dictated by the scientists from Western countries. Professional research is application-oriented research, and it has limited goals and does not usually lead to conceptual breakthroughs. So if you really want to do certain breakthroughs, you must come out from the professional research. Most of the professional research work disappears from our memory within a generation. But conceptual breakthroughs is carried. And ideal research activity is a contribution to the domain knowledge And such scientists usually do not look for social recognition or becoming popular scientists. So basic research, it seeks peer review and acceptance. That means whatever I am conducting, the results that are the outcome of this research should be peer reviewed. Means the persons of my intellect living elsewhere in this world or the globe should cross-examine my research, and then you accept my research that yes, it is publishable and it is accepted. A professional research activity, on the other hand, it desires social recognition, awards, promotion, etc. from the professional bodies like departments, academies, and committees. So peer recognition of a conceptual breakthrough. Okay, I repeat, peer recognition means all the peers are recognizing your concept. For example, when Einstein recognizes the work of Professor S.N. Bose, that is a conceptual breakthrough recognized by the peer group, is a permanent contribution to knowledge and ends up a page in the history of science. Awards and recognition by committees may make these scientists famous and visible or even popular, but these live only for a short period of time. Thus, Nobel laureates go out of our combined memory, but Nobel class work remains permanently etched in memory. These are great scientists and their research work is great and represents the highest quality. They are the geniuses like Newton and Einstein. So deciding on the choice of the research problem is the second research dilemma. What type of problem should you decide? A particular type of professional research leading often to technology development or even an invention remains permanent in our memory. For example, diesel engine, electron microscope, DNA sequencing, biofuels, etc. Because they have enormous social impact at the level of the common man. So doing professional research also, you can live in the memory of the people and in the history. So it took Dr. Goldenberg in Brazil decades of research to develop process for ethanol production, as he was generously funded. Because I tell you, the biofuel is the ethanol, and the future automobile will run on the biofuels. And this particular gentleman, Dr. Goldenberg, he has dedicated decades of research to develop processes for this ethanol production. Now, Brazil is one of the highest ethanol producing country. Today, it accounts for a major portion of national income. So, patentable knowledge results from such type of professional research work. So decision making between whether you go for a patent or you publish is the third research dilemma. So I talked about the first and second. Now I am talking about the third research dilemma. That should you patent or should you publish? Official government policies often influence decision in such situation. There was a time when publish or perish was the mantra, that either you publish or you just perish. Then the mantra is mantra of patent or perish. If you have no patent, you are going to perish, and I am not going to fund you. I am not going to fund you means the funding agencies will not going to fund you. So there is another dilemma, and that the third research dilemma. At present, the researchers are confused. Social recognition comes invariably to such work and workers. Sometimes, however, peer recognition is denied to such workers. Even within the professional research groups, many scientists do not care for technical standards, which is the characteristic of those research areas. So honesty and integrity of mind are essential. They're very essential for good work, not to speak of great work. So the highest ethics is the ethics of excellence and striving for it. You strive for the excellence. So experimental science, it seeks truth just like philosophy or religion. In science, both the knowledge obtained and the means to obtain that knowledge are equally important. And the next part, that is the latter part, means how you obtain the knowledge is the scientific method. How you are going to obtain the knowledge through a method application, that is the scientific method. So measurement is the only experiment conducted in all natural sciences. Criteria of reliability in terms of precision, accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity are well defined. So this is part of ethics in experimentation, and training in these aspects is often suboptimal. So if your training is suboptimal, it is difficult to reproduce in full. So at a broader canvas, transaction of knowledge in classrooms, fields, and laboratories is based on the taxonomy of human knowledge during the given time period. These taxa are named departments, divisions, centers, etc., and therefore define the boundaries of particular domain knowledge. It is accepted that the domain boundaries are becoming increasingly porous. That means the domain boundaries are getting dissolved, the science becoming interdisciplinary, and in some cases the subject classification have changed altogether. So restructuring of the university departments at UG level and PG level courses to reflect the true nature of the taxa is needed. Taxonomy of human knowledge, which directs the establishment of departments, is for convenience and is not time invariant. Reorganization and presentation of human knowledge is the need of the hour. This is the ethics of higher education, which is conspicuous by its absence in our campuses. So I conclude. The conclusion is from a sociological and philosophical perspectives. Universities are losing their intellectual and ethical standards. Many sociologists like Shiv Vishwanathan, Sundar Sarukkai, they have bemoaned this fact. But then, Indian National Science Academy has no locus standi on this problem. So these are all the references. You can go through it. So there's a list of references upon which this twins lecture series have been constructed. And I end up with the words of Swami Vivekananda, that we want education by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, the intellect is expanded, and by which one can stand on one's own feet. Thank you for listening to these lectures.